Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to the Ranks FC YouTube channel. We're here to talk Darwin Núñez to Liverpool. We're here to talk Erling Haaland to Manchester City. It's all very exciting. Two of the world's most exciting young forwards coming to the Premier League. My name is Jack Collins. I'm joined by Sam Tide, mate.
Hello, my friend. I'm fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. This has been an exciting couple of days in terms of transfers. It was good to get back for it before everything went absolutely mad. But look, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of days about comparing these two, right? There's been a lot of talk about the fact that everyone's very excited about the fact that Erling Haaland is joining Manchester City in the Premier League, and I think that's been there for a long while. But also then the fact that off the back of it seemed like Darwin came kind of out of nowhere and suddenly was signing for Liverpool. And of course, there's been plenty now of chat about that comparison and who's going to do better and who's scoring more goals next season, etc., etc. So thought we'd try and use our, toolbox from our new friends at 23 and to show some of the data and see if we can make this work. So, I'm going to give you the advance warning. This is the first time we've done this to anyone watching. We are going to try and make the graphics dance for you, but I make no promises as to how effective that's going to be. But where do you want to start, Sam?
I think we just talk about them as players first and outline exactly who they are and how they play. And I guess we can start with Erling Haaland, since Manchester City decided to start their summer extremely early with Erling Haaland. £51 million as a transfer fee. That's a release clause. Quite a lot of agency fees on top. It's not as cheap as it's maybe being reported. It's not as expensive as some people want it to be. Don't add the wages in, guys. That's very, very silly behaviour. Overall, though, this still feels like a pretty decent price for what is an amazing footballer, like an amazing striker. He is a goal machine and he is a physical specimen. He's fast, he's strong. He hits the ball so hard. He's good in the air. He's good in duels. He's good at bounce back touches and layoffs. He's sneakily creative as well as just an absolute goal machine. I remember back at the Under-20 World Cup when he scored 9 goals in one game, a triple hat-trick. I think it was very clear at that point that we were onto something quite special. And he has just, gone through the gears, hasn't he? Over and over again, hasn't missed a step. The only thing that's been able to hold him back is his own body, because he's had a couple of injuries here and there, or maybe not a couple. That's a disservice. He's had a few different stoppages over the last couple of years due to injuries. And that's one of the things that people are sort of bringing up as a bit of a sore point for him. But man, this is exciting to see Haaland come to the Premier League, this physical beast of a player coming to bully our defenders. I mean, I can't wait to see it.
No, it's extremely exciting. I think this is the thing that, we talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but the fact that he's still growing. If you want, tomorrow's podcast has a full section on the fact that Erling Haaland is still growing. So make sure you don't miss that. But, I think this is the thing here. We're seeing two players here whose physical capabilities are almost unmatched, right? These are two players who bring that aggression, that direct running, that ability to carry to the Premier League, like in different ways, obviously. But, these are two exceptional physical specimens.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, it takes us on to Darwin Nunez quite nicely. It looks like it may end up being a more expensive deal. This is reported as 75 million euros, rising to 100 if bonuses are met. There's like 3 different tiers of bonuses. The first one is if he plays regularly. Obviously, he will, because he's cost a lot of money outright. The next is if he does well and Liverpool win games, which they will, obviously. They're Liverpool. And the third one is if, he starts to win individual awards and Liverpool start to win big trophies, and you wouldn't put that past them either. And Darwin Nunez, this has really taken off over the last 2 to 3 days. Liverpool have been relatively aggressive here. He is also a beast. He is also a specimen. As you say, he's got this aggression that underlines his game. He plays angry. Everything he does is angry. It's front-footed. It's aggressive. He presses well. Well, not in great quantities under the last manager that he's just played in, but you can see he's got that Uruguayan grit to him. He can carry the ball over longer distances really well as well, and he's a lethal finisher, man. He's a vicious ball striker, and we've got some shot maps and some data to support all of these assertions on both of these players, which we can start to get into if you like. I mean, I think we should start by looking at Darwin's shot map, courtesy of the 23 toolbox, if we can bring that up, because it's quite, there's a bit of impetuousness here, isn't there? I mean, there's a little bit just outside the box there. All those grey shots are off target from distance. It's possible that that may not be his skill set. It's possible that no one has been brave enough to tell him not to do it because he's a scary boy, isn't he? But maybe this is something that Jurgen Klopp can get through to him. That kind of range isn't necessarily his area. But there's a little cluster of stars over towards the left corner of the 6-yard box. That's his preferred angle. That's his range. And that's courtesy of him playing basically half the season off the left flank in a 3-4-3 under Benfica's first manager this season. And then in the second half of the season, they went with somebody else. And he played as a genuine number 9 in a 4-2-3-1 at the very top of the tree. And that's where some of those more central shot locations start to come in. But this is a guy who gets a lot of chances in the box, in the width of the goalposts, in the 18-yard area, and more often than not, they go on target. And he scored a lot of goals this year, 0.95 goals per 90. And that does not take into account the hat-trick that he scored in a game, I believe it was against Belenenses, that got abandoned in the 46th minute because Belenenses had a COVID crisis and went down to 7 men, and the ref had to call it off. Nunez had a hat-trick robbed of him that day. It would have taken him up to 26 league goals for the year.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can look at those kind of things, and we can look at the fact that he's been an incredible goal scorer. Look, the two here clear at the top. Now, Ricardo Horta is a bit of a different beast because he plays a very different role for Braga. But Taremi and Nunez have been clearly the best two strikers in the division. And I think that when you look at, Taremi's 30, he's probably not going to get that big move at this point in his career. Darwin feels like the obvious person to come in and join here, considering that the Portuguese Primeira to the Premier League has been a route, well taken of late, and a route that's worked for a lot of people.
It has, yeah. And just to make these statistics more impressive, obviously, Darwin has the 3 goals to add on to that if you count the called off game. Also, he's taken fewer penalties than Taremi. He's also made fewer starts and just played fewer minutes because he's had a couple of injuries of his own this season. So he's doing this in fewer minutes and with fewer, basically 0.8 xG chances from the penalty spot, which makes his tally really, really impressive. And I do like this route, Portugal to England. It's proven to be really successful of late. We've got a comment here that basically supports that, right?
Yeah, Hilton says the way Diaz and Fernandes adapted to the Prem from Portugal, I think the criticism has been thrown around based on the quality of the Primeira is quite harsh. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think, it's not necessarily quality, though. It's also stylistic natures of things. And the fact that players have been able to make that jump, I think, is an important thing to consider. And it's one that maybe isn't always given the credit is deserved as a culture point, right? It's not necessarily how good a league is, how important a league is, or, where it sits in the rankings. Is how they adapt to each other. And actually, we've seen of late players come from Germany and struggle, especially in those forward roles, because of the way that the Bundesliga is so end-to-end and so open in terms of transition. What we've seen from the Primeira is players come in and actually do really well. And I think that's an important thing to just be aware of, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, look, the bottom end of the Portuguese top tier is rubbish. Like, let's not get that twisted. Like the very bottom, the bottom 3-4 teams, they are awful. They are really bad. And when Porto and Benfica and Sporting play against them, you are half expecting a 5-6-0 like that. They regularly beat those teams 3 or 4-0. They are so much better than them. But really, the important point is what Jack makes. It's the stylistic nature of it and how it cross compares. And that's why more often than not, players that go from France to the Premier League, they survive and they thrive. Players that go from the top end of Portugal to England, they do quite well as well. But if you're La Liga midfielders who are pretty technical, they don't have that kind of physicality or aggression to them, they will struggle no matter how technical they are. And when you're converting over from the Bundesliga, you're right, it's just so frenetic and so much, the whole game is played in transition. It can be really hard for those players to slow down and take stock because that's not really how their league goes. So there is an important point to be made there about the transition. Now, Darwin is moving from a league into the Premier League that Luis Diaz has just basically made fun of. And as you say, Bruno Fernandes and Ruben Dias have also made that step really, really easily. Erling Haaland is about to make the more difficult step from the Bundesliga and previously the Austrian Bundesliga. And he's moving into Pep's possession style template. So there are a lot of question marks there. I actually have no doubt that he'll solve them all, he and Pep together over the course of the first year. But it is a very different transition these two players are making.
Is it worth just discussing where you think Darwin will feature within this Liverpool setup? Because we could pull this map up of kind of where he played. Now, you mentioned it there already. He played two different roles last season. One of them was kind of more of a left wing role, and the other one was a centre forward role. And he's, proved very, very competent in both places. But can you see him playing wide for Klopp to begin with?
I don't think he'll want to do it, but that's not really a knock on Darwin's ability to play wide, because he can play that role really well, particularly in transition. I just think he'll want to put Luis Diaz in his best role, which is on the left wing, clearly. And this half season we've seen from Luis Diaz has been so strong. He'll want to keep that rolling, and he'll probably just want to put Darwin in there up front. I mean, it's the easiest move to make, because if Sadio Mane leaves Liverpool as expected, he vacates the number 9 role and Darwin can just step straight into it. I think that Darwin would find it easier to play initially off the left side rather than through the middle, and I think you'll probably agree with me there, Jack. Yeah. But I'm not so sure he's going to get given that chance. And he's just spent the last half season as the number 9. I think he steps in here as the big money acquisition, the guy that needs to score goals, and the guy that will end up playing as the number 9. Although the fact that he can play both is really helpful, particularly in the context of Liverpool, because Jurgen Klopp likes to mix and match the look of that front three and move them into different positions and roles. Salah could play up front. Firmino could play as the 10 in a 4-2-3-1. There's loads of different looks. If you've got all these players that can play 2 positions, not just one, it gives you so much flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we move over to Haaland then and have a little look at what he's got on the table here? And
yeah, show me his shot map, please.
You would like his shot map, would you? Here
I would like to see Erling. I mean, it's gorgeous, isn't it?
Map. It's really pretty.
Gorgeous. Oh,
I like the fact that the one shot from outside the box and the D, because I'll include the D in this, is from so spot down the middle. He's like, oh, okay, cool. That looks like I'm on. But my favorite star is the one on the goal line. I think that's where I'm at with Erling Haaland, and it's something that kind of maybe
just ask Timo Werner. It's not always that easy to score from that position.
No, it's not always. It's not always. But also, I think perhaps it's just how many crosses City do put in. Like, it's something that maybe goes a little bit under the radar. City love putting the ball into these areas.
They do. I mean, ideally, they do it from cutbacks and their low balls into the box. And that's probably where Haaland is running onto these balls and sort of, finishing them first time. I was going to say caressing them, but he doesn't caress anything. He slams shots. He does everything with power. And he'll be converting those opportunities, creating space for himself. That's going to be great. Also, when City kind of aren't playing very well after 60 minutes, if the passing rhythm isn't quite there and they're not really finding a way through, they do sort of end up resorting to sending 10 crosses in and seeing what's happening. And it will be quite good for them to have a bloke who can actually head the ball into the net to actually put those crosses to good use, because Erling Haaland can also do that. He's not an aerial monster. We're not looking at I don't know, Wout Weghorst or Chris Wood or one of those guys. We're not looking at that kind of player at all. He's no traditional target man, and he's not someone that you really, really want to prioritize servicing in the air. But the fact that he can do that and create all of these angles for these finishes across the floor as well, it just gives them that dual element, doesn't it? And look, he's a shot happy guy. He's going from one very creative team to another. He'll get loads of opportunities. He averages a goal a game. He did it for Salzburg. He did it for Dortmund. I mean, there's only 3 other dudes in the world that can average 1 goal per game. 2 of them are Ronaldo and Messi, and the other one is Mbappe as of this season. That's it.
Yeah, we're talking about generational talents, right? And that's what it feels like Haaland is. Now, nothing's a lock, right? There is no such thing as a lock transfer in football. Something that's always going to 100% work, because there's so many things that come into this, the human side, all of the things. And also, D-Boy points out that you've forgotten Lewandowski there, which is quite rude. But equally, it's one of those things where you feel like the system is going to work for him. And Lewis here, he says, look, no shots from outside the box. Pep will love that. That's what Pep will look for here, in that it's the sensible striking ranges. And that's why you can see so many of those stars and dots are red, because they're in ranges which make sense to shoot from.
100%. I love the restraint. I love the ability to know your own limits. It's something that Darwin has not necessarily quite mastered yet. I mean, either that or he just gets a bit too excited. But we saw, comparing the 2 shot maps, that Darwin does take on those kind of impossible shots a bit too often, maybe, and that can be coached out of his game. Haaland is a player that feels so developed already, despite the fact that he's not that old and hasn't actually played any more than, what, 2.5 to 3 seasons of senior football. He feels like he has mastered his own skill set, is so self-aware, and isn't really discovering himself as a footballer at this point. Whereas Darwin still feels like he could add this to his game, he could knock that out, you could coach this out of him, you could coach that into him. He feels a bit more open. And I think the shot maps actually do a good way of visualizing the restraint versus the kind of excitement that either of these two strikers are feeling.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. And look, we've got a comment here, which is, I suppose, what a lot of people have come for, though. Who do you predict will get more goals next season from HLE?
Is that because you put Darwin versus Haaland on the tab?
Look, it's all about getting people to click on the link. But, ultimately, you look at this, and one thing that jumps out here is the expected goals per 90, right? In the look at the difference between those two figures. And this is, partly to do with the fact that, we're going back to that point that Darwin is probably less developed in terms of knowing exactly what he is as a player. No one's sticking Erling Haaland on the left wing. Our Pep might, but no one has stuck Erling Haaland on the left wing up to this point, because it's very clear what he is and what his skill sets are and how he works with them. Whereas Darwin's versatility, whilst it's a strength, is also a sign that there's a player there that's not quite decided if they are a wide forward or a centre forward yet, and that's kind of reflected within this.
I agree. I massively agree. And to answer the question, I mean, I don't think it's particularly bold to say that Erling Haaland is a better player than Darwin Nunez right now. And he's heading to a team that are going to create a bucket load of chances. Now, there is going to have to be some adaptation when it comes to Haaland and Man City in terms of meshing, and there needs to be some give from both sides. We do not want to see another Romelu Lukaku, Thomas Tuchel scenario, where one is too stubborn to change for the other, and or vice versa, and we end up with a season like the one we've just had. So I would suggest that Pep will do that, and I would suggest that Haaland will work to change his game in the same way that Aguero worked so hard in that first season for City to add facets to his game to enable him to continue to do what he does best, but service City in other ways that he never really had before. So I think that Haaland will start quicker. And okay, there's a rotation risk here because it's Man City and Pep.
There's a rotation risk with Liverpool now. It's worth pointing this out that whilst Klopp might change his formation next year, and I do wonder how much of that is going to be that shift into a 4-2-3-1 that was so successful at Dortmund. But I do wonder if there's a point here where, to begin with, obviously Diogo Jota's still there. Salah looks like he's staying. Even if Mane leaves, you've got Luis Diaz. You've got Firmino, Fabio Carvalho's come in. There's a lot of different things going on here about who's where, and therefore it does mean that I think there'll be rotation from both, and that makes it quite interesting in terms of this question. The other thing is the injury record, right? And I suppose that it's probably worth me going right back up to the top of these comments and looking at this question eventually, which is, you talked about Haaland's injury record being concerning, but Nunez's knee issues seem much more serious. I looked this up quickly, just in terms of Haaland obviously signed for Borussia Dortmund 6 months or so before Nunez signed for Benfica. In that time, Haaland's missed 28 games and played 67. Darwin's missed 15 games and played 57. It's not miles off, right? These aren't figures that are too far off each other. And there is this kind of overwhelming thought sometimes with players like this, is because they're so physical, because they rely on those attributes so much, that injuries are kind of a natural part of what happens to them. And we've talked about it with Mbappe a little bit in a different kind of way, and that he's so explosive that we do wonder if his peak is going to be earlier than perhaps players who are less built in that regard. And I wonder if this is just something you kind of have to take rough with the smooth with players like this who are such physical specimens.
Yeah, I think you probably do. I'm not as up to date on Darwin's knee as the others. I mean, I'm trying to roll around in my head right now, like what's better or what's worse. Haaland, who has like multiple niggles and strains, and obviously with a rotation pattern and being less relied upon at City than Dortmund, will that enable him to just ease the pressure on him a little bit? And will it result in a perfectly healthy Erling Haaland? It might be. Or is one locatable, manageable injury to one area fixable. And actually that makes Darwin better. Like, I actually don't know. Obviously, we're not physios, so I have no idea. But I quite like the fact that they've missed a roughly similar amount of time, because when you're comparing them, you can't be like, well, this guy he's got a worse injury record. So they're on the level playing field. They're built similarly, and they've got a similar missed games record, which is kind of perfect because there's so much symmetry with these two deals. The timing of the announcements and the moves, the fact that these two have gone out and got really similar forwards to try and upgrade their offensive lines, probably in response to each other, because they push each other all the way. And they've ended up with two similar aged, similar sized, similar speed players who play in similar positions and score loads of goals. And they both miss 15% of the season with injury. It's classic.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talked a lot about the way that Liverpool are going to set up. We haven't talked quite as much about how City will, but Will asks this. He says, will Pep potentially play a duo of Julian Alvarez and Erling Haaland? I think Alvarez has more potential to play in one of the wide roles, but this does strike me as one of those where it will probably be some sort of rotation unless drastic measures are called for. But it's Pep, so it's really hard to double guess what he's going to do at any given situation. Never mind when he's brought in, one of the world's already best forwards and one who is, sort of screaming, I need to be in this conversation from across the pond in South America. And we're yet to kind of see how that transitions. Now, look, a couple of years back, I remember Gabriel Barbosa and Gabriel Jesus absolutely tearing things apart in South America and both being given big moves to the continent, to the European continent, and kind of struggling to make that change straight away. Now, I think Alvarez is better than both. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I really, really like him. But I think what City are doing here is trying to future-proof themselves, because either way, they're looking at, a player who they're pretty sure is going to be a nailed-on success in Erling Haaland, and then one who they've got really good vibes about in Julian Alvarez.
Yeah, I mean, if you are a little bit concerned about the fact that Erling Haaland picks up the odd injury, then you'd better have someone that can step in. And if they're expecting to lose Gabriel Jesus this summer, then you're going to have someone else. And I guess by the same token, you wouldn't want to rush Julian Alvarez into action and have him start 4, 6, 7, 9 games in a row when he's just fresh out of Argentina and has so much to learn. I mean, bear in mind, playing for Pep it's like relearning football. So not only are you looking for a new house and learning a new language, but you're also relearning the game that you've played for the last 20 years. Now, Haaland's a City fan. He doesn't have any of those initial settling in concerns, but he will have to adapt too. I find it tough to believe that they coexist for the first season very much and that they share the pitch too much. I think that they're different players, but the way Julian Alvarez delays his runs and then heads into the box, he'll probably end up running into the back of Haaland, who's already stood there. So it's kind of like a kitchen sink proposal right now for me in terms of like, oh my God, we need a goal. We've got 10 minutes to go. What should we do?
And how often does City need a goal in the last 10 minutes? I mean,
it's
take the last couple of minutes of the season aside, it's rare.
Yeah, very rare. So actually, I don't think Alvarez has any kind of long-term future wide, but he probably ends up playing a few minutes here and there for City initially there, because I don't think there's room for him up top, especially if Jesus stays. But I can't see him starting too many games. And I can't remember the last time I saw Pep chuck 2 strikers on, I can't think of it. I don't think it's happened.
which is probably worth pointing out, right? You're absolutely right. Let's finish with a couple of radars, shall we? Because you like a radar. I particularly like a radar. They're my favorite thing in the toolbox. I'll be perfectly honest with you. You like a shot map. I love a radar. Yes. But look, there is a point here to make that whilst there are similarities, and you look at that top kind of, let's say 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock on each radar, there is a difference here in what happens in terms of progressive running and dribbling. And that's the big difference between these two players, right?
Yes, I think so. Of course, Darwin has an advantage here when you just refer to the bottom left, which is what you're doing, which is the progressive runs and the dribbling. Obviously, Darwin is doing a lot more of that than Erling Haaland. There is a reason for that. He's just spent about 1,500 minutes playing wide left. That's where you get to dribble. And even when Darwin plays centrally, he naturally peels and goes into out over to the left-hand side into the channel, receives the ball and runs with it. So he's doing a lot more running with the ball. And like when he gets going, good grief, he is fast and he is strong. He does fall over a bit and lose and tangle his legs a bit because there is a balance issue there, but he's so big that it's very hard for you to keep your balance when you're running that fast, and it's very hard for you to chop and change direction. But the progressive running is one of Darwin's strengths, and if he does end up playing a little bit of time on the left-hand side for Liverpool, this is something that will come into play. I expect to see Thiago Alcantara pinging crossfield balls over to Darwin Nunez, him receiving, trapping and running and skinning someone down the side. I mean, it's definitely something he has in his locker. I think Erling Haaland could do that. He just doesn't have to. He's much more of a focal point. I think we don't have it, but if we had passes received, they'd be very similar. They're just receiving them in those slightly different areas, as we know. The top right of this graph is
look at that. That's where they get the ball, right?
That's where they get the ball. So I mean, Nunez can be a focal point. Sometimes he is, sometimes he's not. Haaland probably could run down the left a bit, but he doesn't have to. They're both receiving longer passes. They're both trapping it. Haaland does one-touch layoffs quite a lot, and he tries to use bounce passes. That ball that goes into him goes straight back to an on-rushing midfielder on a bounce pass. Darwin probably takes it down and dribbles with it because his pass completion isn't great, and his short game is nowhere near as polished as Erling Haaland. So they've got very different styles when they receive the ball and what they want to do with it.
Yeah, no, very much so.
And you can see that here. What does shock me there is the pressing duels on Darwin, and I don't think we should take from this that he can't press, because he definitely can. He's a Uruguayan striker. He's going to run until the final whistle blows. But in Benfica's system, which is a little bit more laid back, he wasn't necessarily asked to do a lot.
There's an element of dominance, right? In terms of the way that Benfica play and who they're playing against. They're asked to dominate games more than they're asked to high press. And ultimately that's reflected here. Yeah. And I'd imagine you'd see something similar with Haaland, but I would imagine that he will be asked to, both will be asked to do a little bit more of that in their new homes. And I
Agreed,
like that.
Yeah. If there is something to be concerned about on any of these radars, it is that pass completion for Darwin. It's not good. It's in the first percentile of Europe. It's as bad as it gets. It's just a bit scruffy. Now, I appreciate that his passes are often under pressure, final third. Maybe he's trying to thread a ball through. Maybe he's, you can't punish a player for trying to be creative with the ball, but he does need to sharpen up a little bit in that area. And that is something Liverpool will immediately look at.
Okay, and there we have it. And I think on that, we're probably going to call this a day. There's plenty more on both Darwin and Erling Haaland on tomorrow's podcast. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you go onto your podcast app, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, and search Ranks FC. We're doing 5 whole transfers on there tomorrow. We're talking about some of the biggest deals in Europe and giving them some grading. So make sure you're subscribed. If this is your first time on the Ranks FC YouTube channel, please do make sure you hit that subscribe button at the bottom. We're going to be doing plenty more of this kind of thing now that we have the ability to, and now that I'm starting to shake off the cobwebs on working out how it's done. But all this stuff.
Great job, by the way, Jack. Great job on the graphics.
Well, shouts out to our guys at 23 Toolbox who have made all of that possible. All that's left for me to do is say thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much to Sam Tai.
Cheers, mate, and thank you.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you again very soon.